Hello everyone, welcome to Open a Book. A lot of people want to ask you, what is it that the modern woman is so in love with Jane Austen? What does a modern woman have anything to do with Jane Austen, and why would she even want to be reading these books? Why is Jane Austen so fascinating? Why are women so engrossed in her stories? And I think it has a lot to do with the fact that we are modern women. There's a part of us as a modern woman where we sometimes feel overwhelmed at having to be the modern woman. And I'm sure even in Jane Austen's time and throughout the course of history, women have always just felt overwhelmed by the pressure of what they need to be. But I think that's the same for men. I think in every generation and for both sexes, man and female, that there's always some kind of pressure that's put on us by society. And looking back at Jane Austen's time, maybe a modern woman is looking at it as it was such a simpler time. Anne and I often discussed in our Jane Austen book club, we always, almost every time that we got together, we always talked about, wouldn't it be funny if, we all just got together and we sat in chairs and listened to one of us sing or play piano? And I thought that would be really fun. So I love this idea of the time period of Jane Austen, and we do know that in England, it was the Regency period. It was when George III was kind of going crazy and his son was the regent, and the whole country was in an uproar about the extravagances of the Regency, and they mocked him in the newspaper. This big, huge, fat slob who all he did was just seduce women and play cards, and it was a time of luxury and anything goes. Jane Austen was telling us of a time of refinery and etiquette, and I feel like the art of morals, values, manners, all of that seems to be lost. And for a woman, there's so much expectations of us to be sexual, to have to be like a man, and we have to live up to the standard of a certain size and a certain look and a certain way of doing things, that the pressure is really hard. And I know back in Jane Austen's time, it was the same thing. We watch Pride and Prejudice and we see that Lydia was the silly girl, and most of us are Lydia today, chasing after the boys and just being silly and funny and goofy, where many of us aren't the Elizabeth, where we are refined and we know how to hold our tongue and we know how to defend ourselves in a manner that is not offensive. And I, as someone who is very vocal and outspoken, I really wish I had that type of ability to speak my mind eloquently, so that it's not so offensive and hurts someone's ears or makes someone turn away and say, I'm not listening to that. So this is why I'm reading this book right now. I just really want to understand that time a little bit more and what it meant to be a woman, how to become an accomplished lady. Goodness, we don't even consider ourselves a lady anymore. In fact, being a lady is more for men these days. It's more for transgenders, have a more etiquette and glamour and manners as a woman and femininity than most women today do. It would be great to go back to that time where being a lady wasn't looked down upon, and being a lady meant that a gentleman was gentle to a lady and took care of them and guided them. And I know all the feminists out there are going, whoa, no way, I don't need a man to take care of me. Sister, you do. We were created for relationships, whether it is a man or a woman, and I'm not going into the gay marriage thing. I'm talking about companionship. I'm talking about friendship and relationships. We were meant to have that relationship, and men and women each have a role to play. I don't care what anyone else is saying in the world. Biology tells us the truth, and that's all there is to it. Not going to get on a political, social rant on this, but I do believe that that's why women are very drawn to this society, to this period, to this time period, because a woman wants to feel like a woman, and a woman wants to be treated like a woman. We want to be treated like a lady, but we've lost that art of gentleman and lady, and we lost the art of what that means. It's this whole, I don't need a man to help me with anything, and what has happened is the man is becoming a woman. In that sense, men are really confused. They don't know what to do with women anymore. They don't know how to treat a woman anymore because we give them 9 million different mixed signals. I need you, I don't need you, I want you, I don't want you, I want your help, I don't want your help. And so it's all confusing. But in Jane Austen's time, it was just laid out. It's what you did. Jane Eyre. I really don't even know how to say this. When you get done reading Jane Austen and you're just in this world of luxury and fantasy, and well, not fantasy, when you're engrossed in this world of dances and 10,000 a year and Mr. Darcy and romance and this comical worrywarts and the talkative Miss Bates, and the characters are satirical. And I wasn't sure what to expect with Jane Eyre. I really wasn't. I knew nothing about Jane Eyre going into this book. Absolutely nothing. I knew nothing. I was instantly drawn in because Charlotte Bronte was a brilliant word crafter. I don't even want to call her a writer because she crafted words. She knew how to put them together to really just give you this visual sense of emotion and rawness and realness. And wow, I just immediately was drawn in by the words that she used that were just heavy. It's one thing to use words because big words, but it's another thing to use those big words because they are going to give you an idea of the heaviness of the subject. It's going to fall on you hard like a brick. It's not being rubbed in your face like, I know big words. It is presented to you by Charlotte Bronte as a means of saying, this is a serious thing I'm talking about. And the words that are so big and hard and heavy match the story. We're not using words just to use words. We're using words to form the story, to form the feeling, to form the emotions. Usually when I get to a book where these words are so big and it's all the time and you're like, oh God, you're being pretentious. Yeah, big words and whatever. And it turns me off. It really does. I'm not one for books that, you have to look in the dictionary every 5 seconds because someone just wants to show you that they know big words or they've gone to the thesaurus. But Jane Eyre is using bigger words, but it's not complicated. It's in context and it feels like it belongs there. And so with this story, there's a heaviness in the beginning of it. And right off the bat, you're like, whoa, this is not Jane Austen. I am not in Jane Austen's world anymore. I am in reality. I am in a dark place that scares me. Jane Eyre is a book that will tug at your heartstrings, that will make you go, oh my God. It really will. It'll make you, God, really? Wow. Because you really do. You have to think this can't be true. But we know reality is that it is true. We may have two different worlds here. And one is Jane Austen's world that was very much what she was writing about. And the other is the dark reality of society that's outside of wealth, and it's not even outside of wealth, because we do get the story of wealth, and we do get the story of poverty versus wealth, except for it's presented in a totally different way. It's presented in a way of what happens to those who are really, really poor compared to those who are really, really wealthy. And we start learning about Jane as a young girl. And we get to learn about her horrifying experience as a child. And I am really only this far. And I do know that Jane Eyre was a 3-volume series. And I recently watched it's called An Invisible Walk. And it was based on the Bronte sisters' story. It was a 2-part series that I absolutely loved. In fact, I'm a little obsessed with it. I almost feel like I need to watch it again and again and again, for numerous reasons, because their story is tough. Their life was tough. Their family was a mess and relatable. And in their lives, they picked up stories that they would hear from other people, and they would create stories out of them. And they just found out recently that there was a real Jane Eyre that they lived by. So we do know that Jane Eyre was a real person. Now, if this was her story, we don't know, but we do know that Wuthering Heights was another story that was picked up from Emily, who was just overhearing a story and came up with this story of it. They knew how to tell the story of the story that was being told to them in casual conversations and bring it to life. So I knew there was a transition, because she went from the institution to becoming a governess. And so you do feel that transition being moved over. When I was reading Jane Austen, you were always expecting those, what's going to happen? And it wasn't one of those books, those high dramas. And I do like that in movies. I like that in books, where you're not always like, oh my God, why does something bad always happen when something good is going on? And so I guess right now I'm waiting for the ball to drop on Jane again, because the ball was dropping on her throughout her entire childhood. And you just could not help but feel the pain of this little girl. And it begins with the little girl speaking, but it switches back and forth to the adult Jane Eyre remembering and telling the story. And she calls you the reader because she knows you're reading her story. And so she's telling you, reader, listen here. And for the reader, this is probably going to be whatever, as she begins to explain. So at the beginning, you think it's this little girl telling the story, but then further on, you realize that it's the adult Jane Eyre who's telling her story, who is giving you the accounts of what her childhood was like. And you kind of get that feeling back and forth of her being a child, of her being the adult. And it's brilliant, because it's not one of those things that you go, oh, that's really poorly written, because when people do that as a mistake, you're like, wait, something's not right here. But you get that with Charlotte's style of writing, and because she'll talk about a situation as if she's in it right then and there, and then all of a sudden she's talking about the next instance or event as if she's remembering it. So, but you don't get confused in it. You don't. I mean, she brilliantly weaves it all together to where it's like a major jigsaw puzzle where the pieces fit absolutely perfect. If you've ever done a puzzle where the pieces fit in the spot but don't fit perfect and they don't come together tightly, you know, that's how some authors write, but hers is just a fine woven tool here. I mean, seriously, she's just a brilliant writer. I do want to share with you a couple of the quotes that I found in here that I really enjoyed. Helen is a main character in the institution. Jane Eyre is an orphan who was raised by her uncle, but her uncle died, and the uncle's wife was very, I don't want to say abusive because she was, but it was more of an emotional and mental abuse, and she was abused by her cousins, physically abused and bullied and picked on. So you get that right off the bat, and it's really, really a tough read. And then she gets sent to an institution because her aunt doesn't want to deal with her anymore. And so she sends her off to this so-called Christian institution for orphan girls. And it's really a horrifying experience. And I don't want to give too much away if you haven't read Jane Eyre. But I'm just giving you the tidbits. I don't want to spoil anything for you because I think that the reader really does need to read this for themselves to really get that feeling, and so you can feel the emotion behind it and you can get pissed off. Okay, so she meets Helen and in the institution, and she becomes very close with this girl, and it's a very weird situation that they're in. Helen is picked on by the teachers, by one in particular, and always being told off and always being told how wrong she is and how she can't do anything right, but yet she's always doing everything just perfect. She's smart, she's listening, she's paying attention, she's the only one who's picking up the lessons, and yet she is always the one who is picked on and scolded and punished for doing exactly what all the other girls are doing. So Jane is really ticked off by this. She's really like offended by the fact that Helen, who is so good in her eyes, is always being bullied by this teacher. And Jane is like, I wouldn't put up with that. I don't know why do you put up with that? You know, Jane is like asking Helen this. And so there's this conversation between Helen and Jane that I thought was really beautiful because Helen has this pure spirit about her, and she is very godly and good and kind and thoughtful, and she really thinks about this, and she's older than Jane. She's about 12 years old. So Jane is asking her, you know, why, you know, she's talking about this goodness, and her, you know, Helen's telling her, I wander off in my thoughts, and I'm, you know, so I have every right to be scolded. And so Jane starts out this conversation with, and when Miss Temple teaches you, do your thoughts wander then? And Helen responds, no, certainly not often, because Miss Temple has generally something to say which is newer than my own reflections. Her language is singularly agreeable to me, and the information she communicates is often just what I wished to gain. Well then, with Miss Temple, you are good? Jane asks her. Yes, in a passive way. I make no effort. I follow as inclination guides me. There is no merit in such goodness. And Jane says this, a great deal. You are good to those who are good to you. It is all I ever desire to be. If people were always kind and obedient to those who are cruel and unjust, the wicked people would have it all their way. They would never feel afraid, and so they would never alter, but would grow worse and worse. When we are struck at without a reason, we should strike back again very hard. I am sure we should. So hard as to teach the person who struck us never to do it again. And Helen says, you will change your mind, I hope, when you grow older. As yet you are but a little untaught girl. And Jane says this, but I feel this, Helen. I must dislike those who, whatever I do to please them, persist in disliking me. I must resist those who punish me unjustly. It is as natural as that I should love those who show me affection or submit to punishment when I feel it is deserved. This is such a profound conversation when we talk about people who have been bullied, because Jane Eyre has been bullied, Helen's been bullied, and Helen, they've both been mistreated badly. They're both orphans who were neglected and rejected and let down. And Helen comes to this point of forgiveness and taking responsibility for her own life. And she's taking that responsibility and trying to teach Jane, you know, we're not perfect. We do have faults and we should always be aware of them. And if someone sees those faults in us, we really should take responsibility for it. Whereas Jane, on the other hand, is like, you get hit, you hit back harder. And that's kind of my take on life. I am a little bit Jane, where I feel like, you know, you just, if someone doesn't like you for no reason, you know, then I have no reason to like them either. And I love how she says, it is as natural as that I should love those who show me affection or submit to punishment when I feel it is deserved. And Jane goes through a lot of punishment, unjust punishments, and unjust neglect and rejection for no reason. And so she has every right to feel that way. And Helen has submitted to the fact that she's not perfect. She must have something bad about her that makes people want to lash out at her. So she carries it on and she accepts it, and she doesn't grumble or complain about it. She doesn't complain about anything, Helen. I'm just like, wish I could be like Helen. That was one of the most beautiful exchanges between them, because I felt it was very profound and very real, and exactly what I think, you know, a girl would feel who has been bullied. Jane Eyre has been pretty much secluded from the world. She's never been outside of the institution. She's never been outside of where the aunt was supposedly taking care of her, and she was always locked up and away from the family because they hated her so much. So they kept her away from the family. So she's been secluded from the real world. And so now she's growing up and she's coming to this point where she's starting to reflect on what's going to happen to me when I get older. What am I going to do? And so she says this: my world had for some years been in Lowood, which was the institution. My experience had been of its rules and systems. Now I remembered that the real world is wide, and that a varied field of hopes and fears, of sensations and excitements awaited those who had courage to go forth into its expanse to seek real knowledge of life amidst its perils. What a great way to explain how we have to venture out into the real world sometimes, and how the real world is rough, and there are hopes and fears and sensations and excitements, and we have to have the courage to go forth into its expanse, whether it's going to be good or bad. I thought that was beautiful, considering what we know about Jane Eyre and what she had experienced throughout her life. So she goes on to say that she's a grown woman now. Well, she's not a grown woman. She is still a teenager at this point, but she's outgrown the facility. She's become a teacher now, and she's really giving a lot of thought of, what am I going to do with my life? I've never been a part of anything. What am I going to do? And so she says, I had no communication by letter or message with the outer world. School rules, school duties, school habits and notions and voices and faces and phrases and costumes and preferences and antipathies. Such was what I knew of existence. And now I felt that it was not enough. I tired of the routine of 8 years in one afternoon. I desired liberty. For liberty, I gasped. For liberty, I uttered a prayer. It seemed scattered on the wind, then faintly blowing. I abandoned it and framed a humbler supplication for change, stimulus. That petition, too, seemed swept off into vague space. Then, I cried, half desperate, grant me at least a new servitude. You feel the poetic dance of words in their writing, and you can't help but fall in love with that. And while Jane Austen is a great storyteller, there's something to be said about the difference in the style of writing, because Jane Austen is fun and frivolous and it's just funny and satirical, and you can't help but smile when you read Jane Austen. You really can't. I mean, if you're not smiling when you're reading Jane Austen, seriously, something's wrong with you, because it's always so uplifting and fun, and even in the bad parts, it feels a little fun. But this is not a fun read. This is a thought-provoking, deep, dark, haunted read. This is the things that we feel so deep inside of us as people, as humans, as a person who lives in the real world and is troubled by it. And to know that this child had never, been out in the world, and now she's going to venture out, because that's where I am, where she's venturing out and she's becoming a governess. And I don't know what happens from that point on, but I do know that this does turn into a romance novel a little bit. It's not entirely a romance, because we're not getting that through this part at all. We are not getting romance here. We are getting the backstory. We are getting to know Jane. We are getting to know her past. We are getting to know her thoughts. We are getting to know that she wants more out of life. She has had it. She has had enough of everyone else telling her what she was going to do, how she was going to behave, and how her life was going to be dictated. She wanted to start making a way for herself. And again, here we go with this idea of the woman making a way and doing whatever she has to do to make it in the world. Because back then, we know that women like her were just thrown away. They were nothing important. They became governesses. And in that society, while a governess is a majorly important role in the family, in a family, we also know that it was almost frowned upon. It was almost like an insult that you had to become a governess because you had all the skills. You could read and write and speak in foreign languages. You knew how to play an instrument. You were very, very intelligent, but yet that didn't matter in the world. The only thing that mattered was where you came from and how much money you had. And if you didn't have any money and you came from nowhere, all those good things about you didn't matter. It just didn't. Those things today, we are very fortunate to know that if any of us possess those qualities, we would be amazing human beings. And I think about that because even in Jane Austen's novel, we know that women were accomplished. We know that Bingley says, my gosh, you women can do anything. And I think about women today and I think, are we that accomplished? These skills are acquired through an intensive training process that begins in childhood and continues until the triumphant day of marriage, whereupon one can rest comfortably on one's laurels, which means everything that you learned is no longer important and you don't have to carry on with it anymore. So one of the things that you had to do in order to become an accomplished woman, and that is even in Jane Eyre, is studying several languages, acquire a basic grasp of geography and history, become a proficient musician, draw or paint. That was the other thing you had to be really good at, was being good in art. You also had to have the art of needlework and sewing, and you also had to learn how to dance. So all of those things really mattered. But in Jane Austen's world, that got you somewhere. That meant you were an accomplished lady. In Jane Eyre's time, with Jane Eyre, all it meant for Jane was, you get to become a governess now. You get to be the one who teaches the elegant woman all of those great things, even though you are the one who possesses them. It's really quite a contrast to think about. Please comment below if you have read Jane Eyre before and what your thoughts on it. Please don't give me any spoilers. Just let me know if you like Jane Eyre, what your thoughts are on the beginning of the book, of her childhood. I don't want to know anything past that, but I do want you to join the conversation below. Please make sure to subscribe. Click the subscribe button below. Make sure to also click the notification bell so that you can get notified every time that I upload a video. I am uploading tons of different things. I don't have a niche. Okay, I don't. I am a master of all things. I have a passion for all things, so you're going to get a variety of videos, but I do stick to common themes. I also want you to engage in the videos. I want you to feel like you can come here and participate in the conversation. So please do. I would love it if you would pick up Jane Eyre with me and start reading with me, and we can continue this conversation as we go along. So again, thank you for joining me. I hope that you have enjoyed today's series on Jane Eyre versus Jane Austen. I will see you next time on Open a Book, where we dive a little bit deeper into Jane Eyre.